Okay, so by the end of this lecture, I'm gonna give you some advices also or instructions for the well, hopefully this will work now. So yeah, by the end of this lecture, I'm gonna give you some advices also regarding this upcoming exam, which is completely optional, of course, but it can be a good test of your knowledge so far. So I suggest that you all register for that one as well. But let me just share the screen then, so we can begin the lecture. Okay. Okay. So welcome to the 12th lecture of my Classical Greek Introductory course. And today we begin with overviewing the third declension nouns with the stem ending in sigma. These you find on page 54, section 465 in the Cambridge Grammar of Classical Greek. Further, we are going to look at a few adjectives with stems ending in sigma as well. And you find examples of these on page 76, section 528 in the Cambridge Grammar. We continue with overviewing the reflexive pronouns, which you find on pages 90 and 91, section 7.3 in the grammar. Finally, we are also going to acquaint ourselves with subordinate clauses of the conditional kind. Particularly, we are going to overview how so-called prospective and counterfactual conditional subordinate clauses are constructed in Classical Greek. But let us turn to the first topic of today, which is nouns with stems ending in sigma. Typically, these stems end either in os or in s. However, the s sound at the end of the stem disappears in some numbers and cases, namely when the ending begins with a vowel. Thus, it may appear that the stem in these nouns is in fact shorter than it is. But in fact, the shortened stems in some numbers and cases, like in the genitive singular, which you find details of on the screen, is a result of the loss of the stem ending sigma, together with contractions of the vowels in the stems with the vowels of the endings. The Cambridge Grammar has three examples of nouns of this kind. The neuter noun genos, which means race or family, with the stem genos, and the well-known person names Socrates with the stem Socrates, and Pericles with the stem Pericles. But let's overview these forms. So if we begin with looking at genos, we have here in the nominative singular genos, genus in the genitive, gene in dative, and genos in the accusative. And then the vocative is identical with the nominative. And then in the plural, we have gene in the genitive, genon in the dative, genesin, and in the accusative, gene. And then if you turn to Socrates, we have here Socrates in the nominative, Socratus in the genitive, Socrate in the dative, and Socrate in the accusative. And then the vocative form has Socrates. So this is vocative form is pretty much identical with the stem. And then of course there are no plural forms because it's a name of a singular person. And then Pericles is Pericles in the nominative, Perikleos in the genitive, Periklei in the dative, and Periklei. Okay, so we have some connection problems here, but let's see if we can fix them. Anyway, we reached these nouns and looked at these 3 examples that we have here on the screen. And you can also find further examples of nouns in this category on pages 54 and 55 in the grammar. But let's now overview a feminine noun in this category so that you get an idea of how the masculine and feminine nouns differ from the neutral ones. So here we have the example trieres with the stem trieres, meaning trireme. And this noun is inflected as follows. In the singular, we have here trieres in the nominative, trieros in the genitive, triere in the dative, triere in the accusative, and trieres in the vocative. And in the plural, we have trieres in the nominative, trieron in the genitive, trieresin in the dative, trieres in the accusative, and trieres again in the vocative. And since this word is completely absent in the Cambridge grammar, we can also overview the inflection of the neuter noun kreas, which means meat. And here we also have a stem ending in as. So in the singular, meat is kreas in the nominative, kreos in the genitive, krea with the iota subscript in the dative, kreas in the accusative, and kreas in the vocative. And then in the plural, we have krea in the nominative, kreon in the genitive, kreasin in the dative, and krea in the accusative and vocative. Okay, let us turn to the adjectives that we have on our agenda today, which have the same kinds of sigma ending stems, but where the concluding sigma in the stem in some cases has disappeared as a result of contraction. The example we have here is the 2-ending adjective alethes with the stem alethes, and which means true. You may note the result of the contraction, especially in the genitive singular forms of this adjective, which has originally been alethes, but as the concluding sigma of the stem has disappeared, the vowels epsilon and omicron have been contracted, resulting in the new diphthong u and the genitive singular form alethos. So here you can overview the full paradigm of this adjective. Contemplate it for a while and try to remember the forms. Okay, so next we have on our program today the reflexive pronouns. In classical Greek, there are 2 main uses of reflexive pronouns. On the one hand, we have so-called direct reflexivity. And this is when the pronoun refers back to an element within the same clause as the reflexive pronoun itself occurs in. This use of the reflexive pronoun corresponds to how the reflexive pronoun is used in English. In other words, when a direct reflexive pronoun is used in classical Greek, the sentence or clause in question can usually be rendered with a sentence containing a reflexive pronoun in English as well. Thus, for example, the phrase "aisra men sauto legeis," containing the second person singular reflexive pronoun in the masculine dative sauto, may be translated as "you say things which are shameful to yourself," which is to say that we in this case can use the English second person singular reflexive pronoun yourself to translate the Greek reflexive pronoun sauto. However, in English, reflexive pronouns are usually only used to express this kind of direct reflexivity. In other words, when the pronoun is used to express indirect reflexivity, which means that it occurs in a subordinate clause and refers back to an element in the main clause, the English language avoids the use of reflexive pronouns and prefers the use of regular personal pronouns instead. In classical Greek, however, reflexive pronouns can also be used to express this kind of indirect reflexivity. So, for instance, we have in the sentence "Parekeleonto de auto pantes me majestai al opisten heauton tattestai." The reflexive third person plural pronoun in the masculine genitive heauton, which occurs in a subordinate clause and which refers back to the subject pantes, all in the preceding main clause. But when translating this sentence into English, it would be grammatically suspect to use the corresponding third person plural English reflexive pronoun themselves in the translation in question. That is, it would not be very natural to translate this sentence with "all urged him not to fight, but to take position behind themselves." Rather, we should have to say "all urged him not to fight, but to take position behind them," because if we would say "behind themselves," we would maybe be referring to themselves, that is the ones who are urged to take the position. But that's not what's meant here. We are saying that they should take position behind the ones who are asking for this position to be taken. But in classical Greek, reflexive pronouns are often used also in subordinate clauses to refer back to elements in the main clause. And this is especially common in connection with reflexive pronouns in the third person, both in the singular and plural, while the indirect use is less common in the first and second persons. Okay, but let's overview the full paradigms for the reflexive pronouns in classical Greek, and these exist in the first, second, and third person singular and plural. However, they do not occur at all in the nominative case, and also in the first and second persons there are no neuter forms. All the same, here we have, to begin with, the paradigms for the first and the second person singular and plural. So if we begin with the singular, we have here in the first person emautuu in the genitive, emauttoo in the dative, and emauton in the accusative. And then in the feminine, we have emautes, emautte, emauteen. And then the second person is seautuu, seauttoo, seauton, and in the feminine, seautte, seautte, seauteen. Turning to the plural forms, we may note that these actually consist of two regular personal pronouns placed next to each other. The one consisting of a first person or second person plural personal pronoun, and the other of a third person plural personal pronoun. So if we begin with the first person again, we have here in the masculine genitive hemon auton, then in the dative hemin autos, and in the accusative hemas autus. And then in the feminine we have the identical form hemon auton, and in the dative hemin autais, and in the accusative hemas autas. And then in the second person plural we have the masculine genitive hymon auton, in the dative hymin autos, and in the accusative hymas autus. And then in the feminine, again identical form in the genitive hymon auton, and in the dative hymin autais, and in the accusative hymas autas. So yeah. Yeah, so these forms are all inflected according to the second and the first declension. So there's nothing especially noteworthy about their endings. But next we have the forms for the third persons, reflexive pronouns. And especially noteworthy here is that there are two variants of each of these forms. One with an initial epsilon, and one shorter with an alpha beginning, which looks very much like the third person plural pronouns we have been acquainted with before. Unlike the personal pronoun autos, however, both of these variants have a spiritus asper on the initial vowel. We continue having these issues with the connection. I hope this is not disturbing the lecture too much, but that you're able to follow it still. Okay, let's return to this program then. We were in the third person's reflexive pronouns, and noted that they have all of these reflexive pronouns in the third person have an initial vowel with a spiritus asper on, so this should be noted. And it allows also us to distinguish between reflexive pronouns and regular personal pronouns in the third person. So for instance, this hautu, if it would be just an auttu, then it could be also a personal pronoun, but since it has this spiritus asper and not the spiritus lenis here on the initial diphthong, we can deduce that it's used as a reflexive pronoun here in this case. Okay, but you can overview this and get acquainted with this more closely in your own time. But now we can turn to some more syntax. And what we have on our agenda today is subordinate conditional clauses. Conditional clauses state the conditions under which something may or may not happen. In English, sentences of this kind usually begins with the conditional conjunction if. In Greek, the usual conditional conjunction is a, and this word may sometimes merge with the word on, which is a so-called modal particle. And in this case, the conditional conjunction is given as ean. That is, if this kind of merger between a and on occurs. In general, the modal particle on is used to cause a kind of modal change in verbs. Thus, for instance, a verb in the subjunctive mood can be combined with the modal particle on to express future action, and the modal particle on conjoined with an indicative, for instance, an imperfect, can be used to express a counterfactual event. Now, to effect these kinds of modal changes in modern English, you have to use some auxiliary verb. Like, for instance, in the sentence, if I had an income, I would have money, wherein the auxiliary verb would is employed to bring out the counterfactual nature of the state given expression to in the main clause, namely that of the subject actually having money. But let us now turn to two examples in Greek of the kind of conditional clauses we are concentrating on today, namely prospective and counterfactual conditional subordinate clauses. In prospective conditional clauses, that is, in conditional clauses which refer to envisioned future states, the conjunction ean together with the verb in the subjunctive mood is typically used in the subordinate clause. The subordinate clause then gives expression to conditions that are expected to be fulfilled. The main clause, on the other hand, has a verb with a clear future reference, which most often is represented by a future indicative. Thus, for instance, in the sentence "Tauta poieso en kratesomen," I will do these things if we win, we have in the conditional clause the conjunction ean combined with the aorist active subjunctive kratesomen, while the main clause has the future indicative poieso. So this would be an example of a conditional sentence with a prospective subordinate clause. How about the counterfactual ones? In these cases, we typically have in the subordinate clause the conjunction a together with an augmented verb. That is an aorist indicative or an imperfect, or it could also be a pluperfect. The subordinate clause in these types of sentences then gives expression to a counterfactual state of affairs. That is, to events which, as a matter of fact, never took place. And here, the main clause, in turn, has a verb which is augmented to, so the verb is either an imperfect, an aorist indicative, or a pluperfect, although we haven't learned the pluperfect yet. And this augmented verb in the main clause is the Let's see if we can even finish this lecture now, because this connection problem is again an issue, unfortunately. Anyway, we reached the counterfactual subordinate clauses. So if we take this again from the beginning, we have that the subordinate clause in these types of sentences give expression to a counterfactual state of affairs. That is, to events which, as a matter of fact, never took place. And here the main clause has a verb which is augmented. So the verb is either an imperfect, an aorist indicative, or a pluperfect. And this augmented verb in the well, let's hope that we'll be able to finish this lecture. Oh. Yeah. So yeah, we have both in the main clause and in the subordinate clause in these counterfactual sentences, we have an augmented verb, so a past tense verb, either an imperfect, an aorist indicative, or a pluperfect. And in the main clause, the augmented verb is combined with the modal particle an. So, for instance, in the sentence "Ei ebulomen e pratton an," had I wanted to, I would have done it. We have in the conditional clause the conjunction "ei," followed by the imperfect ebulomen. While the main clause likewise has an imperfect e pratton, conjoined with the modal an. So this would be an example of a conditional sentence containing a counterfactual subordinate clause. And counterfactual subordinate clauses, by the way, can refer both to the present and the past, which can be a good thing to keep in mind. But that was all for the actual content that we had today. But as bonus material, we can look at the present subjunctive and optative forms of the verb aim, to be, because we've had some of these forms, so we might as well overview the full paradigm here. So if you look at the subjunctive, we have in the first person singular o, in second person singular es, and in the third person singular e. And then in the plural, you have in the first person omen, second person plural ete, and the third person plural osi. And then the optatives of aimi in the present tense is in the first person singular an, second person singular as, and third person singular ae. And then in the plural, we have two alternatives. We have amen, and then we have amen in the first person plural. And then we have eite or aete in the second person plural, and an or aesan in the third person plural. Then finally, I should also give you the instructions for the upcoming exam. So first of all, the material that will be relevant for this first exam is lectures 1 to 10. So all the material connected to lectures 1 through 10 will be relevant for this exam. So basically all the grammar we had, all the vocabulary we had, and the 10 first chapters. And how I would recommend that you would study for this exam is to try to get into a day-by-day routine in these approximately 2 weeks that you have until the day of the exam. So ideally, I would recommend you to spend 1.5 to 3 hours each day with the material. And as an example I've given here, you can use the first day to go through lecture 1 and then particularly rehearse vocabulary 1 and grammar 1 on that day. And try to learn as many of these paradigms contained in that lecture by heart as you can, and as much vocabulary as well as is humanly possible. And then on the second day, you can follow the same routine with regard to the material of lecture 2 and vocabulary 2 and grammar 2, and so on. And when you've gone through all the lectures, you can then rehearse them again, but maybe a bit more efficiently, so that you during one day you maybe try to rehearse 3 lectures and the vocabularies and grammar connected to them and so on, and on the second day the 3 following ones and so on. And then the exam is already, the day of the exam has already arrived after that. So the exam in itself won't be that long. It will be approximately half a page of Greek text, which is based in this vocabulary and the same syntax that we've had in these chapters in the textbook that we are using. So the syntax and the vocabulary, the grammar will be exactly the same as in these chapters that you're already familiar with, but the content of the chapters will be new, so you won't have seen it beforehand. And how it works is that I'll send you on the day of the exam around noon. I send you these exams to all of you who have registered for the exam. So the last day for registration is 15th of December. So Wednesday, 15th of December. You should have sent an email just stating that you would like to register for the exam to my mail address, which you all have. And then on the day of the exam, Thursday, 16th of December, I will email this exam to all of you who have registered, and then you can return this exam whenever you feel like it. So take all the time you need to translate the text that the exam contains, and there will also be some verb forms and some noun forms which are underlined in this exam, and you will be asked to analyze them. So the analysis I will ask is a very simple one. It's just, if it's a noun form, you will be asked to give the gender, number, and case, and if it's a verb form, you will be asked to give the person and number and the voice and tense mood. So basically that's it. So if you studied for it, or if you already translated some of these chapters, I think you won't have any problems with this exam, but it will be a good test for you to see how far you reached in your studies. So that was all for today. Thank you very much. And hope to get as many registrations as possible for this exam as well.